We're creating about as many jobs as those other metros combined.
So Bend hates to be compared to Boulder.
We could have a whole hour conversation about this. I think it sets us up another kind of foundation.
Participating. I think that's the difference between being a citizen or sitting on the sidelines.
These conversations are brought to you by the Lad Group, Bend's leading real estate team. Help continue this Bend Beat conversation by subscribing, sharing, and leaving us a review. We have Anthony Broadman here with us today, and we have a lot of good stuff to talk about. I'm really excited you're here. I appreciate you having me on your podcast, and I wanted to turn the table a little bit and really get into what you're doing because you're super involved in this community. So for background for our listeners, Anthony Tony is an attorney at Galanda Broadman, his firm, city council member here in the city of Bend, former chair of the Oregon and Washington Indian State Bar, right? Degrees from Arizona and Princeton, dad of three, and a good enough
wife of one.
Husband of one. And fast enough biker, so I will never accept an invitation to go on a bike ride with you.
No, that's not true. We can always ride together.
No, we can't. I'm just, I don't say that facetiously. You're too fast for me. Before we get into what you're doing with the city and all the other things you're doing, I want to hear a little bit about your Bend origin story.
Sure.
Kind of the how and the why and the when you arrived in Bend and why it's your home.
Yeah, so I think I've heard you say this. If not, I'm sorry, I'm attributing it to you. Everybody kind of has that day that they fall in love with Bend.
Yeah.
And for me and my wife, it was Valentine's Day 2009.
Okay.
We came to interview. She was interviewing at what was then BMC to be a pediatrician there.
Okay.
And I fished in the morning. We skied in the afternoon at Bachelor.
Yeah.
And we had come to this place. I didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
Knew about the Cascade Classic,
Yeah.
the bike race, which had been going for 40 years.
Yeah.
And that was our day we fell in love with this town, the way it looked, the way the neighborhoods each had their own character. Downtown was this jewel of Central Oregon. And we had the good fortune of being able to interview for a good paying job at the time.
Yeah, that's not the typical story. Usually it's a lifestyle move and then they cobble their life around it. Right?
So we had the good fortune of moving here for a job at BMC for my wife. I had a law firm at the time, which I need to be near an airport to travel from, and was able to build up a law firm here in town representing small businesses and representing tribal governments from base here in Bend with my partners in Seattle.
So tell me, where were you coming from?
We were coming from Seattle, and my law firm is still there. I still have an office in Seattle and an office here in Bend.
Okay.
We have 8 lawyers for the firm. We represent tribal governments throughout the country.
Yeah.
So gave me a little flexibility to be somewhere this wonderful.
Yeah.
Be close to an airport, but also I tell people this was and is a great place to build a business, a small business. And so I'm really fortunate to have, lived that story for the last 12 years. 13.
Yeah. So we came here about the same time. And what was interesting, when I came here, Bend opens its arms to me. So Mike Mudd, who you know, I was getting a beer at Deschutes. My first week here, we were kind of, trying on the town, trying to figure out if his home. He put his arm around me, talked about what a great place it is. A couple days later, he sat me down with all the boys, a lot of people in business here, and just got me integrated from day one. It was amazing.
How many people is Mike Mudd responsible for setting up shop and moving here?
Yeah, isn't that
being
cool?
Successful?
Yeah. What an interesting environment to just go, put your arm around someone new and say, let's get you going.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. And that's the spirit of this city, which, it's growing so fast. And for folks who were here before you and I think there's a desire to hold on to that grit and that connection among people here.
Yeah.
And it's something we have to nurture and take care of.
Well, and I want to talk about that because I think we're at kind of a critical point with kind of philosophy and belief of who we are as a city and town. And maybe it's we're going from a town to a real city.
Right.
But before we get to that, to add a little bit more background and color on you, I found an interesting note here. Prior to becoming an attorney, you were a journalist in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I right after college, I worked for a newspaper called Vietnam News, English language newspaper in Hanoi.
Yeah.
I was an editor there. It was great. I would have stayed, but I had a lovely girlfriend at the time who wanted to come back and start med school.
Yeah, okay.
So didn't stay longer than a year. I came back. I was a reporter for 2 years in Tucson before I went to law school.
Okay.
Went to law school at University of Arizona and then practiced law representing tribal governments ever since.
So let's talk about that, tribal governments. Yeah, I read a lot of your history, and a lot of that is around tribal governments. And how'd you get involved with that?
My current law partner recruited me out of law school.
Okay.
And we started this firm together.
Okay.
And I have that relationship and all of our amazing clients to thank for for me, like one of the great pleasures of my life has been representing tribal governments throughout the country.
Yeah.
Working on issues that are, pretty complex. Usually, a lot of people say they do bet the business litigation. We're often involved in issues that are, existential for tribal governments. The future of tribes and tribes' ability to work with other jurisdictions like the federal government and state government and local government.
Wow. That's probably a path you didn't expect to take.
No, I thought I was going to be a criminal defense lawyer because I love constitutional law.
Yeah.
I love tough cases, but luckily I met a great guy who we ended up being business partners with, and it's been great ever since.
Now it's become a big part of her foundation of your career.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I like I said, I'm just very fortunate to work for the clients I work for.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about kind of your belief in Bend before we start talking about individual issues. So what are some of the main pillars of concern that you have for the city of Bend right now? Like if we had to boil it down to a couple main subjects that are the things that keep you up at night, or that when you were running for city council were forefront of what you were trying to solve.
Yeah, I mean, I ran for city council because I was concerned about the future of our transportation network. That's how I got involved.
Yep. Okay.
I was part of the PAC that worked on getting the bond passed, the GO bond passed.
Sure. Yep.
To provide sustainable funding for the kind of transportation future we want here.
Yep.
We're going to have 30,000 more people here in the next 10, 12 years.
Yep.
We've seen the kind of growth we've had over the last 10 years. We know what kind of growth we've had over the last 22 years since 2000. We have some significant challenges, opportunities ahead of us when it comes to transportation.
Sure.
But I think now with what we've seen through the pandemic, what we've seen politically in our region, what we've seen as a country, I think all of the challenges, the opportunities that we're facing as a city can be categorized under how we're going to manage this growth. And that is as granular as homelessness, as our water resources, as affordable housing for folks who are living in sheltered situations. The cost of housing here is changing the way our city looks, changing the way our city lives. And so I think the biggest challenge ahead of us is dealing with the growth that we've experienced over the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and planning sustainably and being good stewards for, the next generation.
Yeah, so I mean, growth is obviously a two-edged sword, right? I mean, there's all kinds of problems that are created with growth, but it comes with opportunity.
Right.
So there's a lot of cities in Bend that don't have the growth, but they have their problems too, but they don't have the resources or energy or synergy to solve those. Right.
There is energy and passion here to not sort of sit on our hands.
Yeah.
So I spent last week interviewing with other electeds from other cities around the county and our county commissioners, interviewing an executive director for our joint office, our coordinated office to end homelessness. And one thing that every candidate came in and told us when they were interviewing with me and the commissioners was, there's a different energy here. You aren't waiting for Oregon to come in and fix this. You aren't waiting for HUD to come in and give you more resource, although we would like that for your coordinated care system. You are doing this yourselves. And that's, I think, a real testament to the spirit of the city.
Yeah.
It cuts across political divides. It cuts across socioeconomic levels. It cuts across where you came from, if you were born here or you just moved here. There's a real spirit of not waiting around. This is a hardworking place. I mean, we came from timber background to growing this into the city it is today. And I think that's a testament to the spirit of the city.
Brian Ladd here. I hope you're enjoying the conversation and find this dialogue relevant to really what it means to live and work and play in this amazing community. As Bend's leading real estate team, we take our role seriously in representing both buyers and sellers at the absolute highest standards of our industry. For more information on how we can help, feel free to visit our website at bendpropertysource.com or text LADD1, LADD1 to 88,000.
So I've done, I don't know, 15 of these podcasts now, and I don't think I've gotten through one without the person that I was sitting with talk about the intentionality of this town.
Yeah.
No one's here unintentionally, and no one's afraid, and everyone's ready to get involved and handle things. And I guess that's kind of a spirit of self-determination of being this geographically isolated town out in the middle of nowhere. No one's here to fix things for us. No one's here to reinvent our economy.
Yeah.
No one's, it's pretty interesting ecosystem that we've got here.
Bend-born solutions work better in Bend to solve Bend's problems than something that we hear from Salem or DC or somewhere else, right?
But what's also interesting, a lot of those Bend-born solutions are from people that are newer to town.
Sure.
They're in from other markets, other cities, other areas, but they bring that passion here. First, let's talk about homelessness. You referred to the joint task or the force that you're doing with the county. Explain a little bit more about that, because homelessness is probably one of the more visceral, real, visual issues that we have happening, and is shaking a lot of people's belief in who we are as a city. Not only for the people on the street of saying, are we okay with someone freezing to death in front of Dutch Brothers, as a town, but then other people just visually saying, hey, is this what we're accepting with as the future? So this is a top issue, obviously, that you're dealing with. And in the past, it's been picked around the edges. Unfortunately, we're not the only ones dealing with this, right? Cities up and down the West Coast, across the nation, are dealing with it. But how are you doing it differently? What's the city doing at this point?
Yeah, well, I would say the state of Oregon is undergoing a significant existential challenge when it comes to homelessness. This is true in rural Oregon, this is true in urban Oregon, and it's obviously true in other states too. But we have a significant challenge here ahead of us.
It's crisis level.
I would say it's a public health crisis, and I don't mean to be alarmist, but that's how I feel. So I have an action bias toward taking action to serve the people who are the most vulnerable and the people who have been experiencing this and really been at the forefront of working on it. That is our service providers. What have we done on council? I would say we have suffered under an action bias in terms of taking action as quickly as possible. I'm glad we have, because I think there's other communities around the state who are far behind us. That's what we're hearing from other places. So immediately upon taking office, we set out to coordinate with the county. Because I think what we're dealing with in Bend right now is a lack of leadership over the last decade or so to really look at this as, this isn't just a housing issue. It's not just a drug issue. It's not just a behavioral health issue. It's everything. And so the idea that the city is going to fix this with, we employ firefighters, police officers, and city staff. The idea that those are the resources that a city's going to fix homelessness with, that's not really a good fit. One thing that has worked in jurisdictions where they have eliminated chronic homelessness, eliminated veteran homelessness, eliminated childhood homelessness is central governance. So immediately upon taking office, we, council, made an overture to the county. It wasn't immediately welcomed, but I would credit the county and the city council that are currently in place for coming up with this plan, which then got reduced to a piece of legislation that we had passed in Salem to fund it. So we immediately have funded a central office. It was such a good idea that 7 other counties throughout the state signed on to the bill, and now they have central coordinated offices to at least address, if not end, homelessness in their jurisdictions. This is a Bend idea that other counties, rural, exurban, urban areas, all saw as we had a missing piece here, and Bend came up with a plan to fix it. Has it solved homelessness yet? Absolutely not. And we've seen the rate of homelessness in this community increase at roughly the same amount every year for like the last 10 years. So people want to point to, politics changing or Measure 110, which essentially made drugs less illegal, or point to the pandemic as generating homelessness, or like Bend has created this, if you build it, homeless services, they will come. And that's not borne out in the data. So in addition to central governance, we are making clear where shelters can be located in the city as a matter of just zoning, like we zone everything else.
Yeah.
And then we're currently in the process of legislating camping, because we've had unmanaged campgrounds, unmanaged encampments in the city. They're really a barrier to getting people out of homelessness.
Yeah.
And they're not safe for people using the right of way. So those three things are concrete actions in addition to, that's really the tip of the iceberg when you look at what staff is doing, what all of our emergency response folks are doing. But we've taken action, and certainly not everybody's going to be happy with it on one side or the other, but I don't think we have a choice but to take action.
Wow, what an insanely complex issue. What's your big, hairy, audacious goal with homelessness? I mean, is it possible to say that in Bend, Oregon, we're going to eliminate homelessness?
If we work together as a community, and this was the whole goal of spending all last week getting this executive director in place.
Yeah.
I'm very excited with the pool of candidates we had. My personal goal is that we eliminate chronic homelessness in Bend. Okay. I think it's possible if we work together. Our goal should be to make sort of bouts of homelessness short, brief, and easy to emerge from. And it's possible, we know it's possible because other jurisdictions have reversed trends on homelessness, graduated people out of homelessness, but a lot of jurisdictions have failed. And jurisdictions in Oregon have failed. Yeah. So it's going to take bold action, and most importantly, coordination between the city as a regulator of land within the city and our public health agency, which is Deschutes County. Yeah. And I can't emphasize that enough. We have to have good partners at every level and other cities working with us to reverse the trends that are very entrenched now. It's been 10 years with relatively the same rate of increase, and that's not acceptable. Wow. So this is a lot on the shoulders of what is essentially a volunteer city council, right? Yeah. Is that sustainable? We're now over 100,000 people. I think it's a big round number that brings the light of the size of the issues that we're dealing with right now. We're not a town. We're a metro area. Is the structure of our governance where people like you have to take such a big section of their career, or put such a big section of their career aside to dive into the issues that we have on this level. Is this a sustainable model that we have? I don't know. I mean, it is right now. Yeah. I think you have, there's a zeitgeist in this city of people who are stepping up to serve their neighbors. Yeah. Whether it's private industry or community groups or city council. And I feel very optimistic about the future. I feel like we have a good group of, community members who are focused on making this community better, improving it. Yeah. It's like a classic. I always think Bend is like a classic car. Yeah. You have you want it to keep it exactly the same because you don't want to change elements of your 1950 Chevy truck. But sometimes there's rust and you got to take care of the rust. Sometimes things wear out, you got to replace them. But you also have to polish the parts that are excellent and succeeding. And maybe that's a bad analogy, but that's certainly how I've always looked at this city. No, I think it's a very visual one and helps. Yeah, and I've always struggled with explaining the impacts and the opportunities of growth on people that are newer to town. Yeah. Because a lot of people like to come here, and Bend's a snapshot in time. They moved here when it was 82,000 or 92,000 people, and there was a certain amount of people on the trails, and there was a certain amount of schools, and any change from that is unacceptable. And it's a very nuanced discussion, and it's an onboarding that takes years to kind of people to understand what the dynamics of the city are. Well, yeah, and you've taken that on in a huge way with 101, which I appreciate. I think that is that's exhibit, B or C or D or somewhere in just the spirit of this place being both conservative, and I mean that in a way of like we want to conserve what is good, and also open and welcoming and aggressively welcoming, radically friendly to people who are not like you. I think that should be the future of Bend, and I think in many ways it is. So we talked about homelessness, but we really have an existential crisis ahead of us on home affordability. Well, it's good to hear you hear that because I'm on the front lines of housing, and I think it's an absolute
crisis. It's an existential crisis to our town right now. And when our median price has gotten to almost $800,000 and the average median wage can afford half of that, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel with that? Do you see enough housing coming on?
I do. I mean, I see the number of units we have permitted in the queue, which is breaking records under this council's leadership like every month.
Sure. Okay.
So, you know, there are big picture solutions, and then there's the more granular.
Yeah.
Big picture, I'm thrilled that we've legalized all types of housing under this council.
Sure.
We were the quickest city to implement House Bill 2001, which is basically, hey, let's get out of telling the development community what types of housing they think will sell.
Yeah.
And put as much stock, still being sustainable, and still making sure that the development is the right kind for a concept plan or a master planned area, but getting us out of over-regulating housing development. I'm very excited and proud of the work we did on the Stevens Road parcel, which was the single largest expansion. It was the only expansion. The last council wasn't able to get any expansions done.
Yeah.
This council did right away. I'm excited that the permitting and engineering and building departments, we've given them the tools by using third-party contractors to clear some of the logjam we've had, in the approval process to get these housing developments at least started.
Yeah.
It's showing results in terms of what we look at when we look at the number of permits being pulled and processed.
Okay.
But it's tough when we're setting records every month because so many people are building and still want to move here.
Yeah.
You've probably seen we're in August. There's been a little bit of cooling.
Yeah, sure.
I think we're going to be dealing with some market forces that are outside of our control, and I hope in some ways that can help us.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that the city is doing everything it can to build the framework for abundant housing.
Okay.
Nowhere is that more clear than what we've done in the Central District.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Central District because some people have an idea of what's going on, but
Right.
I think the amount of change that we're going to see in that is going to be radical. But I think it's an incredible opportunity. I think there's so few cities that have such a prime piece of real estate, walkable to employment, dining, recreation in the core of their town, and where the current infrastructure is relatively low use. Right? I mean, it's a lot of light industrial things like that. Let's talk about that district and what's the city's vision for that.
Sure. So,
and I guess let's one step further. Where is it? Let's remind
so
people where
between the Parkway and it depends where you look, but Parkway and 5th.
Yep.
On the east side of the Parkway.
Up to like Revere on the north and down to.
And if you look at the core area, you would go all the way down to Corpine.
Okay.
But the Bend Central District is north of there.
Okay.
And I have to just add another piece of context that I think is really important. The climate-friendly and equitable community rulemaking that the state just finished up.
Okay.
This is going to change how all urban development in Oregon takes place. It's a result of the governor's executive order on essentially climate-friendly and equitable communities.
Yep.
The idea is every city, and I'm oversimplifying it, so if folks are interested, they should dig much deeper than this, and I love to talk about it, so I will with anybody who's interested. The idea is that cities are going to have to designate climate-friendly areas. Those are areas where you can live close to where you work, you can live close to shopping, they're going to be denser. There are not that many candidates for a climate-friendly area in Bend. I would expect it to be somewhere in the middle of the city and maybe the core area. We don't know yet because we haven't designated it. 30% of new housing will have to go in a climate-friendly area under the existing rules. There's some exceptions to that.
Okay.
But under the CFEC rules, that's the acronym for Climate-Friendly Equitable Community Rules, 30% of all new housing, so we do our housing needs analysis, we comply with the rules and the laws related to expanding the UGB, and once we have our housing needs analysis, we still must, in order to develop cores like we have in our city, put a significant number of housing units in that area. That is going to change what our city looks like. It's going to mean there is going to be a lot of development pressure in the Bend Central District, I expect.
Yeah.
And I should say I'm only speaking on my behalf. I'm not speaking on behalf of the city or officially, but that's my belief about what will occur. The Bend Central District is also at the same time attracting much of the development attention from, I would say, developers outside of the city and the traditional developers within the city. At the same time, we have the tax increment financing tool, which is essentially freezing the tax rate and providing more dollars for infrastructure, like $40 million for affordable housing in the Bend Central District. And the kinds of streetscapes that you would expect to see in a core area of a city. So all of that is to say, we should all anticipate that the Central District is going to shift the geographic center of our city toward it. Whether it takes it completely out of downtown or not, I don't think we know the answer to that, but there will be a lot more development activity, a lot more housing developed in the Central District than we currently anticipate. And I think the biggest symbol of that is the Hawthorne Bridge, which, I ran on that.
I love it.
Right. Yeah. That's why I ran. No.
Yeah. I love the Hawthorne Bridge. I love the concept of the connectivity.
And many people do, because we have the parkway, the railway, and not right there, but the river dividing this city. There's some major geographic impediments to connecting east and west. The Hawthorne Bridge is not just a symbol. It's a way of ensuring that downtown continues to be this jewel in the crown of Central Oregon, and that we have equitable, egalitarian housing solutions, sustainable housing in the BCD. So, I would say the biggest symbol of all of what I've just described is that connection at Hawthorne.
I've seen that happen in Colorado. Down in Denver, they did a pedestrian bridge over Interstate 25. And there was areas that were disconnected from the core of Denver. And I saw the same energy. And there was, it's not just the bikers and the walkers using it. It's a flow of energy and to connectivity. And there was very tangible results. And I'm excited to see that happen.
Yeah, I think it's a necessity, and luckily we have great support for it.
Yeah, one of my fears is that becoming a city that has produced quarter of an acre, eighth of an acre, single family housing for the last 80 years, 100 years. How do we have the infrastructure, do we have the knowledge, the finances to change gears and go vertical?
I think we do. I think the question, I guess I would reverse it on you, is my sense is that industry is going to have to be driving that sophistication. I, like everything, I'm pretty optimistic about it. I think the city infrastructure is there. I don't think this city has seen anything like what we're about to see after the CFEC rules are sort of understood as the framework we're all dealing with.
Because the way you explained it to me was the most clearly explained and really raised my eyebrows, because that's going to force it to happen. And, I guess you could also say, hey, if it doesn't happen, it's going to stagnate everything, because we're not going to be able to bring on more single family housing, things like that. A naysayer is going to say, hey, we're just trying to get enough housing out the door. We have an existential crisis, not enough housing. Now you're putting a barrier up that we're going to have to create a whole new housing type in Bend before we create more housing.
I would say anybody in the development community who hasn't already seen the progress we've made in the city of going vertical, it hasn't really been. You've seen it. That the players in this space are looking at much higher buildings. But that will absolutely be a challenge as we grow into a community where that is going to be not the only focus. There will still be single family detached. But a bigger portion of the construction inventory.
So if anyone out there is listening and wondering if there's an opportunity to do new, large-scale, exciting developments, the city's got a flag out.
There has to be. I think you put it right. There isn't an option under the new development framework that we have. Whether we wanted it to or not, received from the state. And many elements of it are great. Transportation system plan changes are going to be, I think, very constructive. But this is the world that we're living in. It's much like the UGB process. I can pull my hair over, the resources it's costing at the city, which are limited to get this planning work done, this transportation work done, or we can be efficient and work within the system that we've been provided.
Well, I think there's a lot of excitement. And I would just, if people are fearful that there's going to be a high rise next to them, I think education will help alleviate that. I mean, what's interesting is that this area, this Bend Central District, it doesn't really get in the view corridor much. It gets in the way of view corridors of business, and I think it could be one of the most exciting central redevelopments of any city out there.
Yeah, and we have to, there's people who live in this neighborhood,
Yeah.
and we have to make sure that it's sustainable for them and,
Yeah.
and the kind of place that we want to build community.
Yeah.
But I absolutely agree that we are blessed with the kind of redevelopment and infill opportunity that many cities do not have, especially cities of our size.
One, and this type of redevelopment is not going to require the same amount of infrastructure sprawl that others are. I mean, this is going to involve a lot more of those electric bikes and all kinds of transportation. People are going to be going around on one wheels, and it's going to be a new dynamic for Bend.
Absolutely, and we have to have a transportation system that will match that. I think we will.
Yeah, well, it's exciting times. So, I mean, I could go on and on. I really appreciate, all that you've given. I pulled up a quote, is Muhammad Ali said, "Service is the rent you pay for your room here on earth." I thought, I think that's very appropriate for what you've done. I can only pray and hope that, people like you of your caliber continue to volunteer and help lead the city. But thank you for your time today. Do you have anything else?
No, thank you for everything you do, and especially in the realtor community. It's just great to have people with your foresight and commitment to the city. So I appreciate you.